So this is a lecture that I prepared that I call Considering Games as Art. And this began for me in 1995, where the conversation was ended before it even started. And so I made the suggestion that we could make art with games, and everyone around me said, "Are you crazy?" And "I am so disappointed in you," was what my professor said to me. And then they said to me, "Why have you stopped painting?" And so that was where this journey started for me. And so in 1995, there was also this attitude coming at me from the games industry.
Our games are, oh man, who cares?
So,
sorry, I just want to make sure you can hear me.
all right. How's that? Oh, that's much better. All right, so we need to watch that again.
Our games are, oh man, who cares?
So in 1985, here I was between a rock and a hard place. The art community on one side telling me I'm crazy, that games could never be art. And I was believing that it was a medium that was yet unexplored. And the game industry is telling me, who cares? We make games. We're not going to bother with art. So, fast forward to today. It is now 2011. It's been quite some time. And the actual conversation has begun now. So we have Roger Ebert saying games can never be art. And of course, Kelly Santiago saying, wait a minute, games are art. And Richard Rouse says, can games be moral? And what he really means is, can games be art with a moral message? And Mary Flanagan at Dartmouth is saying, what if certain games were something more than this? Entertainment, diversion, etc. Brenda Brathwaite is actually prototyping tragedy with her games. John Sharp is teaching the secret art history of games in Savannah. Brian Moriarty is asking the question, why are some people in this industry so anxious to wrap themselves in the mantle of great art? And then we have Jonathon Blow, who is the designer of Braid, saying it's about the process of taking the question seriously. So the game industry is actually starting to involve themselves in the art conversation. And for me, this is a great day that I have been waiting for a very long time. So, in his GDC talk, GDC is the Game Developer Conference, which happens every year, Brian Moriarty asked this question, can any of you tell me what great art is? And so I said, okay, well, let's consider some of the definitions and the work of some great artists. Okay. Marcel Duchamp is the first one I want to talk about. He's a really big favorite in the game industry. It's art because I say it's art. Well, we're not going to talk here today about whether or not we agree with this. That's a different conversation. But if you take a look at his definition and the work that he did, it definitely, the work is a reflection of the definition. And so you can do things like take a urinal, put it on a pedestal, sign it, and call it art, as he did in 1917. Max Ernst. Max Ernst talked about the meeting of two distant realities on a plane foreign to them both. And he was referring to collage, which he was actually involving himself in very heavily. And so I think it definitely does describe the work that he's doing. Ed Reinhardt. Ed Reinhardt says, art is art, everything else is everything else. And so when you experience an Ed Reinhardt painting, it's very difficult to get a really good reproduction of his work, because when you first approach it in an art museum, it looks like a black square. And this image that is readily viewable here in this reproduction actually emerges out of the darkness after you stare at it for a little while. And so you really do have to approach an Ed Reinhardt painting for itself, on its own terms. Bill Viola is another artist I wanted to bring in. Not knowing is more important than knowing. So what Bill Viola is doing is he's making video art, and so this is a still from one of his installation pieces, and so he's taking a light and he's dragging it across the stage, and it creates a blurred sort of effect. And so in that way, he's trying to speak to the metaphysical, the world within, the world beyond, the world we can't see. So not knowing is more important than knowing. It's really Zen work. Mark Rothko. This is a picture of the Rothko Chapel in Houston, Texas, and I've spent a lot of time there. So basically he says, I'm not an abstractionist. I'm only interested in expressing basic human emotions, tragedy, ecstasy, doom, and so on. Okay? And so when you go to the Rothko Chapel and you experience it, you walk in and there's all these huge black paintings. They appear to be black. Okay? And you sit down and you're like, okay, this feels kind of oppressive at first. But the longer you sit there, the more they begin to pulsate. And you begin to realize that they're not black at all. There's no black paint in these black paintings. And they start to form a symphony because they start to pulsate very quietly. Okay? And so the longer you sit there, the more you can take in all of the pulsations of the paintings that are around you. And it really does feel like you're entering into a space which is addressing tragedy and ecstasy and doom and so forth. It takes you to a different place. Barnett Newman, he said, a painter is a choreographer of space. So if we consider this painting, it starts out with a little bit of white noise on the edge, right? And then you have a zip, right? And then the middle of this painting is just this expanse where you can just breathe and relax and meditate and feel the freedom. And then when you get to the other end of the painting, there's another zip, and then he lets you go. Okay, so he's pretty much choreographed that space just like any dancer would. Willem de Kooning, another big favorite of mine. Basically, he says that I paint the way I do because I keep on putting more things in, like drama and pain and anger and love, and it really doesn't matter if its ideas differ from mine so long as it comes from the painting, which has its own integrity and intensity. So this idea that the painting can take on a life of its own was something that he was really working with. And Jackson Pollock agreed with him. And these two hung out together at the Cedar Bar, and they basically beat each other up and argued about art and got drunk together, and then went home and made more paintings. So Vic Muniz was somebody that was influenced by Jackson Pollock, and so I brought him in and made that connection. He wanted to make something that would interfere with the themes, okay? So all of his work does that. And so this is a series he called Pictures of Chocolate. And he used chocolate because he said it brings to mind ideas that go from scatology to romance. And for those of us who don't use scatology in our everyday lives, in our vocabulary, scatology means the study of feces. So there's a broad range that he's trying to get you to consider. And so this is one of my favorites of his, the Last Supper. So this is a photograph of a picture of chocolate of the Last Supper. Here's some more of his work. Again, he's trying to interfere with the themes, right? So this is a series that he called Pictures of Clouds, where he actually hired a plane to go make a picture of a cloud that was a cloud itself in the sky. And this is another piece of his called Clown Skull. Another piece I thought really illustrated what he was doing was the Encyclopedia Britannica all in one volume for travel purposes. So the next artist I want to talk about is Jeff Koons. Jeff Koons, he says that he's really trying to help the underdog. all right? So what he's doing is he's taking these little tchotchkes that you can get at the truck stop for, $3.95 or whatever, and he's making them a little bit bigger, additioning them, and then selling them in the gallery system, okay? So what he's doing is taking these little forgotten images and he's elevating them to great art through this process. And so it kind of brings to mind, what do we value? Why do we value what we value? And how? All right? So I really love Jeff Koons, so I couldn't help myself to give another slide. So this is these are pictures from a show that he did at Versailles. Okay? And so the juxtaposition of his everyday run-of-the-mill imagery with Versailles is definitely talking about what he's doing. He's elevating them. I mean, he had the guts to actually put them in Versailles as a serious show. And so it's a tremendous juxtaposition. Andy Warhol, art is what you can get away with. And this definition is actually appropriated from Marshall McLuhan. And that fits because everything he does is pretty much appropriated, right? Okay, so what's important is that each of these artists have decided for themselves what their definition of art is, right? And then the work is an extension of that, okay? So if you're going to make games that are art, you need to create a definition for yourself and then pay attention to that definition. Really pay attention to yourself. There is a third task that you have to attend to if you're going to make art, great art, with the game medium. And you need to become aware of the conversation that you are entering into, okay? And this is the part that's often missing with young artists. So let me clarify that. Arthur Danto was an aesthetic philosopher, basically. And what he wrote this book called After the End of Art. And so what he says in that book is that from about 1400 to the 1980s, art was linear. If you were an artist, you were writing the next chapter of the book. You were the next link in the chain. In the 1980s, everything fragmented and became a conversation. Okay? So for a young artist to enter into the conversation, it became more complicated. And you had to become aware of what are all the different pieces and parts of the conversation, where does my work fit, and then how can I make that conversation broader? How does my work contribute to it?